I have another recipe. This is a very simple recipe. It's a bread recipe. It's a bread that I make my family quite often. It's just a wheat bread, whole wheat bread. And my friend Sue from Sue Slims Down had asked me how I make it. So I thought I would go ahead and make a video and share it with you in case you wanted to try it or in case you're interested. You know, normally I would buy my family the Dave's Killer Bread. I think there's a white bread done right is what it's called, and they don't like bread that's like so heavy laden with nuts and seeds and all kinds of stuff, but I do want them to have whole grains. And Dave's Killer Bread is it's like $5 a loaf, and we go through it pretty quick, so it is more cost effective for me to make whole grain bread myself if I can, and they happen to love my bread, so I go ahead and make it at home if I can. Now normally in making a bread, I would normally work with the yeast and the all-purpose flour at first before adding the whole grain flour, but I kind of swapped it around on this one. You'll notice because I want to be able to make sure I get plenty of whole grain in there, and then I add in the all-purpose as a secondary flour so that if I don't need it, I can kind of cut back on the all-purpose and have the more whole grain at first. So that's more important to me to do it that way. So anyway, that's why I've swapped the two, because if you're a bread maker, you might notice that, you know, that's not usually how it's done, but it works really well for us. It still rises and I don't have a problem with it, so that's why I've done it this way. Anyway, I will figure out the points and I'm gonna put them on the screen, and I will go ahead and type in the recipe into the description if you wanna try it yourself. All right guys, I hope you enjoy it. Good morning. My friend Sue asked me how I make my wheat bread, and so I thought I would show you really quick how I make it. I'm going to make one loaf here, and it's mostly whole wheat flour. So what I'm going to do is I'm using this whole wheat flour right here, and I've got 2 cups of it in here. I'm going to have 1 cup of all-purpose flour, which I may not use all of it. I'm basically going to use that to kind of like, you know, knead it together and make sure that it ends up to be a nice touchable elastic dough. I'm going to use 1 packet or 2 1/4 teaspoons of this yeast. I have 3 tablespoons of butter. I have 1/3 cup of brown sugar because I want my family to eat the bread. And I have about 3/4 teaspoon of salt and 1 3/4 cups of water. All right, so let's get started, and I'll show you how I make this. Into my pan, I've got the water. I'm going to stick the butter in here. I'm going to stick the salt in here, and I'm going to stick a thermometer in here, a candy thermometer, and I'm just going to heat it up to about 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Candy thermometer. I'm going to watch this, make sure it doesn't get too hot. I'm also adding the brown sugar. Whoop, doesn't want to come out. And I'm going to stir that around. So here we are at 125 degrees, and as you can see, it's usually at the point where the butter will melt. I've added the quick rise yeast, and you can use regular yeast. It doesn't have to be quick rise. And I've added it to my whole wheat flour, and I'm just going to kind of mix it up and before I add the other ingredients. And I'm also going to transfer this to a larger bowl that I can work with. I actually stuck it in the big mixer bowl for my KitchenAid, and I have this little mixer blade on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the liquid ingredients. I'm going to beat it for about 30 seconds on low, and then I'm going to raise the speed a little bit for about 3 minutes. Most people want to use their KitchenAid for the next part, and I actually like to work with the dough at this point. I'm going to put the flour in here, and I'm going to try to just mix it in to make a dough, and I'm going to add in enough of the flour. If I need more, I will add more to make a dough. I like working with the dough with my hands. I think it's very zen-like and meditative, and I just love the therapy aspect of working with it. So that's what I'm going to do. And I could tell that I'm already going to need another cup or maybe a cup and a half of the all-purpose flour. I've always worked the dough the same way that I used to work with clay when I did ceramics. And so I'll show you, I kind of push down on my left. I'm right-handed, and so then in the right hand, I bring it up and kind of swirl it in, and that way I get a really nice mixing of the dough as I knead it. I have a smooth elastic dough, and I have an old ceramic bowl here that I use for bread rising. I've sprayed it with nonstick spray, and so I'm going to just kind of stick it in here, get some of that oil on there, and then turn it once. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover that up with a nice clean dish towel and stick it in a draft-free place. A draft-free place is usually a cold, turned-off oven. And I know it's going to stay in there for about, since it's a rapid, rise, it could be a half an hour, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it an hour because I have stuff to do. Ta-da! And here is my risen bread. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this out of here and punch it down and just kind of like, squish it down a bit. And in just a second, I'm going to cut it in half. I think that's equal halves. I'm just going to cut it in half, and then I'm going to shape it into a couple of loaves and let it rest for about 10 minutes. And back in the cold oven it goes. I'm going to cover it and close it up and leave it for another hour. All right, preheat to 375, and in goes the bread. And this is after it's risen for an hour. So it's going to go right up here on top. All right, these have been in for 30 minutes. You can bake for 30 to 40 minutes. These are smaller loaves, and I've made larger ones, but these are just the right size for us. They are very tasty. My family loves them, and I hope that you will too. Thanks, guys.